it's Robert Arrow. Econ Circus presents MV equals PQ is Economic Fakery. Go to Twitter hashtag Economic Fakery to see a whole list of fake economic terms, of which this is one of my favorite. This is the equation of exchange. This is also the quantity theory of money. It has different names, but essentially this is the bedrock. This is the foundation for the Friedmanite Chicago school. I'll show you in all sincerity, this, I'm not even making a joke, this equation is entirely fake, but it's so important to the Chicago school that nothing can, I guess, prove them wrong, even if it's to the detriment of society, as we shall see. On the left, you have the enemy of the people, Milton Friedman, compared to the enemy of the state, Murray Rothbard. It sounds kind of funny. It is a meme, but I assure you it is true. Milton Friedman, the famous free market. Milton Friedman believed that a central bank should somehow control the nation's money supply, compared to Murray Rothbard, who wrote a book called The Case Against the Federal Reserve, and also invented the word ANCAP. So please, you decide which one was for the people and which one was for the state. MV equals PQ. And again, I've seen this PT, you can see it PY, it's all the same thing. Anyway, you slice it. On the left, you have money supply times the velocity of money. On the right, you have the price times the quantity. So, I mean, it does seem simple enough. It says that if you have a currency, a money supply, simply times it by the number of transactions for the year, and you'll get the P times the Q, the volume of transactions for the entire year, essentially. Let's start on the right side. The price times the quantity. The problem is that this is an impossible number to measure. There's no way you can get all the prices of all the goods and services and all the transactions and all the quantities and add it up and arrive at a number. It's simply impossible to measure. Therefore, we'll use GDP. That's the go-to. That's, everyone knows GDP. It's not perfect, but it's something. Again, GDP is economic fakery. I've talked about this many times on Twitter. That's for another day, another presentation. But GDP, it's very silly, because if a nation was to, say, borrow or print $5 trillion out of thin air and build a bridge to nowhere, yes, the GDP would increase, but what does that do? And what would that mean for the purchasing power of that nation's currency? So GDP, again, we'll get to that on another day. GDP is entirely economic fakery, but GDP is all we have for now. So again, because P times Q, it can't actually be found, we'll just use GDP, and that's fine. It sounds better anyway. It says M times V, so you take the currency times by the amount of times it essentially turns over, transacts, and you'll get the GDP. Sounds good. So we'll go to the left side now, and we'll see the many problems with the left side of the equation. When it comes to money supply, the question is, what money supply are we talking about? This is all from the FRED, it's called, the Federal Reserve Bank of St. Louis. This is the best as far as just getting data on the economy. Go to the horse's mouth. So we're on the Fed's website. We have currency in circulation, that's 1.799 trillion. Then we have the monetary base, that's 3.4 trillion. M1 money stock of 4 trillion. M2 money stock of 15 trillion. This is the standard go-to. People tend to like this one. It's M2. It seems good, good as any number. 15 trillion, that's the M2. You have M3 of 10 trillion. Note that in 2006, this was discontinued. So someone at the Fed thought that either it doesn't exist or we don't need it anymore. I mean, these things, they do happen. So M3, it's it doesn't matter. And then we have MZM, that's 17 trillion. Um, the problem with money supply, let's just use M2 as an example. That's the most common one. M2, and this is per the Fed, if you scroll down on the notes, it says M2 includes a broader set of financial assets held principally by households. It consists of M1 plus savings deposits, including money market deposits, or of course MMDAs, small denomination time deposits, less than 100,000. Who knows? Or I don't even know where the ones above 100,000 goes. I mean, this is a joke. There is literally no more, and I'd be flabbergasted if 20 people in the world actually understood what this meant. There is no one who studies this, next to no one. It has always been problematic to define what currency is, what money is. Um, there is so few people who understand the ins and outs of this. The Austrians have the TMS, that's the true money supply. They've been contesting this for years. I mean, what they say is just as valid as this. It is, my opinion, better, of course. But, I'm just trying to show you that no one even knows what money supply is, to be honest. The next problem is even worse than the previous problem of defining the money supply, and this is the crux of the issue. V for velocity. Now I'm not making a joke. I need everyone to think back to grade 4 algebra or math class. Just remember when you're solving equations, it's all about reducing or simplifying the equation. The problem with V is that it is not an independent variable. So V is GDP over money supply. So if you can guess where we're going here. Because V is not an independent variable, if V literally is GDP over M, we should put GDP over M in the equation. So now we have M times, and in bracket, GDP over M, which is velocity, equals GDP. Of course, the M on the left side, that's doing the multiplication. Again, get your 4th grade hat on. You have to bring it over to the right side of the equation. The multiplication goes to division. Now that gives you GDP over M equals GDP over M, and therefore we can reduce the M, and we get GDP equals GDP. I'm not sorry to tell you guys, but this is not an equation. 1 plus 1 equals 2, that isn't an equation. 1 plus 1 equals 1 plus 1, or 2 equals 2, or GDP equals GDP, or M equals M. That is not an equation. It is meaningless, and it tells us absolutely nothing. Let's just look at velocity a little bit more in detail. This is per the Fed. The velocity of money is the frequency at which one unit of currency is used to purchase domestically produced goods and services within a given time period. In other words, it is the number of times $1 is spent to buy goods and services per unit of time. And this is a direct quote if you just scroll down the page that I have a screenshot of. So we know that velocity, it's a plug. It's not a real number. It's not a real value. It's just a plug that they made so that their equation will, I guess, try to balance in their minds. But think about this. If the US, the GDP is about 22 trillion, using an M2 money supply of 15 trillion, that gives us, so the Fed literally tracks this, a money velocity of 1.426. Now, again, we know this is completely fake, but let's humor the Fed to consider what it is they're saying. So in 1 year, they're saying that $1 or $100 or whatever they mean, it circulates at 1.4 times in the entire year. Again, that's their exact words. It's the number of times $1 is spent to buy goods and services. So if the velocity is 1.4, that means that in the year, that dollar circulated exactly 1.4 times. I mean, that's just laughable. Again, this is from visual capitalists who I trust way more than the Federal Reserve. They note that an average bill changes hands approximately 75 to 100 times a year. So again, the velocity, it's a complete fake number, but if we were to pretend like it is real, the Fed would say that money circulates 1.4 times in a year. Visual capitalist says 75 to 100 times in a year. It actually does make sense, say 100 times a year, so that's almost three every third day. I mean, I can buy that at least. Okay, you go shopping, every 3 days or so, more or less. I mean, it's better than 1.426 because that's just absurd. So I found that was pretty funny. Back to the equation, why is this so dangerous? The worst thing about this is that nothing I said is new. I did not invent anything. The School of Austrian Economics has literally been saying this and they've discredited this equation decades ago, but it still forms the bedrock for the Chicago School of Economics. Now just consider that. Imagine if even you are a nobody, you have no credentials, if you couldn't post a video or tell a professor or published on the internet that E equals mc squared is false. I assure you, the mathematic community, the scientific community, the entire PhD community, they will read the paper, they'll consider it, and they'll value that, wow, you just proved our famous equation wrong. No hard feelings. But why is it that when the Austrian school, they've done this for decades, no one seems to care, no one seems to notice? Even worse than that, this equation, it's still taught in the CFA, the international CFA exam. If you were to look in the economics section, you will see that they're still teaching this to future people who will be financial planners and financial advisors. So it's still taught to them. How they use it, that's anyone's guess. Again, it is dangerous because it has no validity. An equation should be true. If I can make a simple YouTube video and show that the equation is false, you hope that someone should take note. The worst thing about this, if we forget the whole equation because the equation makes no sense, what it did was it allowed central planning and the Federal Reserve, it got the go ahead from a lot of the free market crowd. They thought, well, Friedman's behind it, Chicago School's behind it, that's okay. With these new economic tools, we can better plan the economy. Now we've figured it out. We've figured out the money supply, we've figured out GDP. They don't even use the equation, it's more so the ideology behind the equation. What it essentially says is on the left side, if we were to increase the money supply and the velocity, again, it's absurd. No one even knows what increases velocity in their minds. I've never heard anyone say what increases velocity, of course. But basically, if you were to increase the money supply, it will increase GDP. Now, this is horrible. This is inflationism. This is statism. In 1912, Ludwig von Mises, when he wrote The Theory of Money and Credit, which I want all you guys to read because it is the best book on money ever written, as Murray Rothbard said. He said, von Mises, he said everything. He mentions the word velocity. He showed why it's silly, why it makes no sense. He talks about inflationism. He talks about all the issues that we're struggling with today, as in the world actually has been noted: the inflation, the money supply, the printing. I'm sorry to tell you guys, but there's nothing new here. The Fed will say things like unconventional monetary policy, expand the balance sheet. The more you read, the more you realize that there's absolutely nothing new about this. They've been doing this since the beginning. They've always been expanding the balance sheet. They just haven't called it that. It is called inflationism. Again, the question is, what do you do if a country has a low GDP? They found that the simple way is to print more money and that will increase GDP. However, they always fail to think about the purchasing power of money. We've seen this throughout history. We know what happens. It happened in Zimbabwe. It's happening in Venezuela. I mean, I beg you people just to consider if printing money, if literally creating money out of thin air, as the Fed, they created $4 trillion plus out of thin air, if that made sense, if that actually worked, why is there poverty? If we can just simply just print money and give it to people to so-called stimulate the economy, to consume, to spend, take on debt, or just take free government money, who cares? Just give the people this money. If that is the answer, why is there poverty anywhere? Why is there poverty in Africa? Why don't their governments just print more money and just give it to the people and make everyone rich? This is the problem with economics. It is either true and therefore universal, or it is completely fake. Some people will say, oh, no, no, no. The US, well, we have the world's reserve currency, so we can do such things. But of course, you have to be an honest person. The US succeeds not because of the Fed, not because of the money printing, but it's in despite of it. If you take Canada, for example, in Toronto, $2 million can't even get you a decent home. For a $2 million home in Toronto, you need a down payment of 200,000. There is no way that a new grad or anyone who doesn't have sufficient funds or is given money from their parents would have enough money to buy a home. But of course, inflation is low because the cost of house prices and the debt associated with them is not factored into anything. And again, if increasing the money in circulation work, then why is there poverty? No one can actually answer that question. I'll finish with this famous Milton Friedman quote. I love this quote. This is from Milton Friedman, who said, inflation is always and everywhere a monetary phenomena in the sense that it is and can be produced only by a more rapid increase in the quantity of money than in output. So that's our equation, it sounds like. A steady rate of monetary growth at a moderate level can provide a framework under which a country can have little inflation and much growth. It will not produce perfect stability. It will not produce heaven on earth, but it can make an important contribution to a stable economic society. I highlighted the things that I found funny. Inflation, of course, the Austrians for over 150 years and even before them, inflation always meant the increase in the money supply. As Mises said in The Theory of Money and Credit, this is in 1912, decades before Keynes. Mises noted that inflation is the increase in the money supply and credit. We know that it's not a monetary phenomenon. That's just ridiculous. A steady rate of monetary growth. I mean, what are we talking about here? 2%, 4%, 10%? It's completely arbitrary and subjective. A moderate level, that's completely arbitrary. Little inflation, I don't know what that means. If you live in Venezuela, 20% probably a day would be considered little inflation. And much growth, that's absurd. Often your mainstream economists will associate the increase in prices with growth. I don't know who made that connection. This one's my perfect, I love this one. Perfect stability. This is a perfect example of just everything that is wrong in the field of mainstream economics. To the mainstream economists, stability means 2% price increases forever. So think 2% one year, 2% year two, 2% year three. Somehow they found that that is stability. Again, I need you guys to put on your grade 5 mathematics hat. Think about the compounding effect of something that increases forever at a rate of 2% a year. It'll go exponential at some point. And lastly, a stable economic society. That is a meaningless term. So here's the challenge. Please share this video and join the circus. Econcircus.com. Find me on Facebook. Find me on Twitter. And I want you guys to please challenge your classmates and your professor. If you are in university, the whole point is to challenge each other and to grow and to learn. Please send your email or your video, whatever you can. I'll post it on my website or Twitter, whatever you want. I want someone to ask their professor, please explain this calculation, explain the velocity of money, and how come Austrian economics is not taught in class, even as an elective, even just give us something, just teach us about it, because it is not taught in Canada, and there's maybe 20 schools in America who actually teach it. So please, let's try to push the professor, push your classmates to do better, because I'm sorry, you're not getting a proper education if you're taking an economics class. And please get a mainstream economist to get talking. The more you get them to talk, the more you'll see they have no real answers. Please read Mises, Rothbard, there's Hayek, there's Hazlitt, there's Mises.org. That's a great resources. You can get all these books for free pretty much on PDF, or you can order them at a very good price. So this is me, Robert Arrow, CPA CA. That's econcircus.com. Follow on Facebook. On Twitter, I have about 5,000 followings. Let's keep growing that. We're always talking to socialists and communists, and it's always a good time. This is the first of many videos to come, and we'll explore economics and teach the Austrian perspective. And it's going to be good. It's going to be fun. Thanks.